Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with Meatless Meatballs. That's right, no animals were harmed in the making of this recipe. I mean, we did take a couple eggs and pulled on a few udders, but I don't consider that harming them. In fact, quite the contrary. But anyway, thanks to the magic of mushrooms, a meatless but still completely delicious meatball is possible. And this is how you do it. So we're going to start by chopping up a couple pounds of mushrooms. So I want you to take your longest, sharpest knife and chop those nice and small. All right, shoot for something like the size of a kernel of corn. A little smaller than what you see here is fine, but don't go any bigger than this. We need millions of little pieces of mushroom. And once that's chopped, we're going to throw that into a large skillet set over medium-high heat with about a tablespoon of olive oil in there. We're going to put in a big pinch of salt, and we're going to brown these mushrooms. And you know what happens, right? The salt draws out the water, they get all wet, they boil in their own juices, but then that evaporates. That's what all that steam's from. And as soon as that pan dries out, I want you to go ahead and throw a nice chunk of butter in there, turn the heat down to medium, and just cook those mushrooms until they're nicely browned. And this truly is critical. If you're not going to brown your mushrooms, this meatless meatball will not taste meaty. And people will be like, hey, your meatless meatball tastes meatless. And we don't want that. So just cook those mushrooms in that butter until they're beautifully golden brown. So something like that. At that point, we're going to go ahead and add in some minced onions. And we're going to cook those onions over medium heat for about 5 minutes until they turn translucent. And yes, the mushrooms are going to continue to caramelize and brown. And they're just going to keep getting meatier and meatier and meatier. So again, this really is the critical step. Take your time. Make sure your mushrooms are beautifully browned. And once they are, we're going to go ahead and turn off the heat and stir in our minced garlic. And yes, that's a lot of garlic, but these are meatballs. And even though the heat's off, there's enough heat in that pan and in those mushrooms to take the raw edge off the garlic. And that's all we're trying to do. So give it a stir. Once that's all mixed in, we're going to dump in our oatmeal. And I'm using the quick cooking type, the 1-minute oatmeal. All right, so we're going to stir that in, and remember, the heat's off. We're going to stir that in, and when that's all combined, we're going to let that pan sit and cool to room temperature before we transfer it into a mixing bowl. And it's very important, it has to be cool before we do this next step. And the reason for that is because the next step is to mix in some finely grated Parmesan cheese, and if this mixture was hot, that would not work out too well. So we're going to stir our finely grated cheese into this cooled oatmeal mushroom mixture, and at that point, we're going to add some very traditional meatball ingredients. All right, we're going to do some plain breadcrumbs, a whole bunch of freshly chopped Italian parsley. All right, 1 egg, although eventually there's going to be 2 eggs. All right, we're going to season it up with some pepper, some salt, and a little cayenne. And then a little pinch of dry oregano. Not too much, just a pinch. Oregano, a very meaty herb. And then I'm going to take a fork and stir that together. All right, so like I said, there's going to be 2 eggs in this. The first one's for a mix-in, and the second one's for a mold-in. So I like to mix this up with just 1 egg in first. I think it mixes better. And you're going to have kind of a dry, crummy mixture like that. At that point, dump in your second egg. And once that one's mixed in, you'll see we'll have a beautifully pressable, moldable, meatless meatball mixture. And don't forget, you can always pinch off a little piece and taste it for salt and seasoning. You could probably tell raw, but you can cook a little piece if you want. And although technically we could form these into meatballs now, we're not going to. You must wrap this up and store it in the refrigerator for at least 4 hours, much, much better overnight. Okay, we need time for the flavor to develop and even more importantly, the texture to develop. So try to let this sit overnight if you can, after which we can form our meatballs. And by the way, the rest of this recipe is pretty much going to be standard meatball procedure. I'm going to use a little sorbet scoop to scoop these out. Or you could just do it with your hands, but this way they come out all the same size. So I'm going to scoop those out onto a lined baking sheet. And then once that mixture is portioned, we have a very important decision to make. Do we want our meatless meatballs to have kind of an irregular rough surface? Or do we want our balls smooth? I kind of like the smooth look, so I like to give them a little roll between the palms to smooth them out, just like regular meatballs. So that's just an appearance thing. The rolling of the balls would be officially optional, but I'm going to do it. And once your meatballs are prepped, we're going to go ahead and throw those in a preheated 450-degree oven for about 12 minutes, 12 to 15 minutes, or until the outside has a nice brown crust to it. I know, they're kind of looking like meatballs. And then to finish, transfer these into your favorite pasta sauce and let it simmer on low for at least a half hour. I would say an hour's even better. Give it a stir once in a while. Remember, the starch in those meatballs are going to soak up some of that liquid. So if you have to add a little splash of water or broth while these simmer, go ahead. Of course, you should probably taste the sauce and adjust for seasoning, but you know that. And that is pretty much it. So I simmered mine for about 45 minutes. And I tell you what, when I grabbed that ladle to serve these up, I actually forgot they were meatless. they looked and smelled exactly like little miniature beef meatballs. I was so excited. So I served those up. Of course, I had to do the gratuitous grating of the Parmesan shot. Maybe a little more fresh parsley if you're taking pictures. And by the way, I did develop this recipe to celebrate Earth Day. Because as you know, mushrooms, or as I call them, earth meat, is about as close as you'll ever get to eating dirt. And there you go, meatless meatballs. And of course, who cares what they smell and look like? What did they taste like? They were incredibly meaty and delicious. I really was blown away by these. Now, this is based on our famous veggie burger, so I was pretty sure it was going to taste good. I just didn't know it was going to taste this good. Just very meaty. That Parmesan, garlic, and parsley really gives it the flavor profile of a meatball, and the texture was almost identical. It really was an incredible thing. And yes, they are approved for use on spaghetti. So anyway, there you go, meatless meatballs made with mushrooms. So whether you're a vegetarian or devout meat eater, I really hope you give this delicious meatless meatball recipe a try soon. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.